The morning light filtered through our bedroom curtains like honey through cheesecloth, golden and thick with promise. I watched Lysander sleep, his breathing steady as clockwork, his face peaceful in that way that made my chest tighten with something I mistook for contentment. The shadows beneath his eyes seemed deeper than usual, carved by some invisible chisel that worked only in darkness. I traced the air above his cheekbone, not quite touching, afraid to wake him. He'd been working late again, always working late, but he still found time to leave little notes in my lunch, still remembered to pick up my favorite chamomile tea without being asked. Perfect love, I thought. The kind that makes you forget to question its foundations. The house around us hummed with morning sounds, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the newspaper hitting the front steps, the neighbor's dog beginning its daily territorial disputes. Everything in its place, everything as it should be. Yet something felt like walking on ice that looked solid but sang with hidden fractures beneath each step. Lysander stirred, his hand finding mine even in sleep. His grip was firm, possessive in a way that should have been comforting. Instead, I found myself studying the calluses on his fingers, wondering when they'd appeared and what kind of work had carved them into his skin. 3 years we'd been together, and Lysander still looked at me like I was something rare he'd discovered in an old book pressed between pages, preserved but fragile. He'd say things like, "I love every version of you, Cordelia," while I brushed my teeth or folded laundry, as if love were archaeology and I were some fascinating artifact he'd unearthed layer by layer. Our routines had calcified into something that felt both comforting and suffocating. Monday mornings meant pancakes shaped like hearts. Tuesday evenings were reserved for old movies on the couch, my head on his shoulder while he absent-mindedly stroked my hair. Wednesdays he worked late at the consulting firm downtown, something vague involving data analysis that he never quite explained in terms I could grasp. Thursdays were grocery shopping together, his hand on the small of my back as we navigated aisles like we were dancing. Fridays meant dinner at Benedetto's, the same corner table, the same order, risotto for me, osso buco for him, wine that cost more than my monthly phone bill. But lately, these rituals felt like performances in a play where I'd forgotten my lines. I'd catch myself studying Lysander's face during dinner, searching for something I couldn't name. He'd smile that perfect smile, the one that had made me fall in love with him in the first place, and I'd feel guilty for the doubt that had started growing in my chest like some poisonous plant. The doubt had no clear origin. It began as a whisper during our 3rd anniversary dinner when he'd told the waiter, "My girlfriend will have the salmon," before I'd even opened my menu. Small thing. Forgettable thing. Except I'd never ordered salmon in my life, and somehow he'd known exactly what I wanted before I did. Or maybe it started when I'd mentioned wanting to visit my sister Ophelia in Portland, and he'd frowned, just for a second, before suggesting we stay local instead. "You have everything you need right here," he'd said, and something in his tone made the words feel less like reassurance and more like a cage with gilded bars. The unease crystallized one Thursday morning when I woke to find him already dressed, standing at our bedroom window like a sentinel. The early light threw his silhouette into sharp relief, and for a moment, he looked like a stranger wearing my boyfriend's face. "You're up early," I said, my voice thick with sleep. He turned, and the familiar warmth returned to his features. "Couldn't sleep. Big presentation today." But as he kissed my forehead and headed for the door, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On our shared calendar, the one he'd insisted we keep to stay connected, Thursday was blocked out as one of his late nights at the office. Yet here he was, leaving at dawn for a presentation he'd never mentioned. The front door clicked shut with the sound of a trap closing. I started paying attention in ways I'd never done before. Attention became a microscope, and under its lens, our perfect life began to reveal hairline fractures that ran deeper than I'd imagined. Lysander's phone, for instance. He'd always been protective of it, but I'd attributed that to professional discretion. Now I noticed how he carried it with him everywhere, even to the bathroom, even when he was just stepping onto the balcony for air. The way he positioned his body when typing, creating barriers with his shoulders. The soft ping of notifications that he'd silenced before I could hear them fully. His work stories, too, began to feel rehearsed. He'd come home with anecdotes about colleagues, Maximilian from accounting who collected vintage fountain pens, Serafina from HR who had 7 cats, but the details never varied. The same quirks, the same phrasing, like dialogue from a script he'd memorized but never quite brought to life. I try to dismiss these observations as paranoia, the kind that sprouts in any relationship when the initial intoxication wears off. But then came the morning I decided to surprise him with lunch at his office. The building he described so many times, glass and steel, 23rd floor, view of the river, didn't exist at the address he'd given me. In its place stood a construction site, orange cones and hard hats, a sign announcing the future home of luxury condominiums. Ground wouldn't be broken for another 6 months. Standing there with a sandwich bag growing warm in my hands, I felt the first real crack in the foundation of our life together. Not a hairline fracture, but something that ran deep enough to let the light in, and with it, the shadows. That evening, I watched Lysander eat dinner with new eyes. The way he cut his food into precise squares. The way he chewed exactly 15 times before swallowing. The way he'd glance at me between bites, as if checking to make sure I was still there, still playing my part in whatever this was. How was work? I asked, the question feeling like placing a stethoscope against a locked door. Productive, he said, then launched into a story about Maximilian's latest fountain pen acquisition, a 1947 Parker 51 in forest green. The same story he'd told me 3 weeks ago, word for word, down to the detail about the gold-filled cap. I nodded and smiled, but inside, something cold was spreading through my chest like spilled wine on white fabric. That night, I lay awake listening to Lysander breathe beside me, wondering who I was sleeping next to and what he'd been doing during all those hours when he claimed to be at work. The isolation crept in slowly. I'd always been social, quick to make friends, comfortable in groups. But somehow, over the 3 years we'd been together, my world had gradually contracted until it revolved almost entirely around Lysander. When had I last talked to Ophelia? When had I last gone out with colleagues from the library where I worked part-time? The people in my phone contacts felt like names from another life, relationships that had withered from neglect I couldn't quite remember neglecting. Lysander had never explicitly discouraged my friendships, but there had always been something, a headache when I planned to meet friends for drinks, a romantic gesture that required my immediate attention when I was supposed to visit family, a project that needed my help precisely when I'd made other plans. Subtle redirections that I'd interpreted as devotion rather than control. Now I wondered if the isolation had been intentional, if I'd been carefully pruned away from everyone who might ask questions or notice inconsistencies. The thought made me feel like I was drowning in shallow water, struggling against something I couldn't quite identify. I started small rebellions. Bought coffee from a different shop. Took a different route to work. Called Ophelia on a Tuesday afternoon while Lysander was supposedly in meetings. Her voice sounded far away and surprised. Cordelia? I was just thinking about you. How's life with the mysterious boyfriend? Mysterious. Well, we've never met him. Every time I visit, something comes up. And you've been so different since you two got together. Quieter. Like you're holding your breath all the time. Her words hit like ice water. I realized I had been holding my breath, waiting for something I couldn't name to happen or not happen. The day I found his other wallet changed everything. It was a Saturday morning, one of those crisp autumn days when the air smells like wood smoke and dying leaves. Lysander had gone for a run, part of our weekend routine, and I was doing laundry when I found it in the pocket of his gray jacket. Not his usual wallet, the expensive leather one I'd given him for his birthday, but a cheap black vinyl thing that looked like it had been bought at a gas station. Inside, a driver's license with his photo and a name I'd never heard. Evander Blackthorne. The same face that had whispered my name in the dark, the same hands that had held mine during movies, but according to this ID, he was someone else entirely. Someone 2 years younger, with an address across town in a neighborhood I'd never been to. My hand shook as I examined the license, looking for signs it might be fake. But the hologram was perfect, the information precise. Even the signature looked natural, like someone who'd been signing that name his entire life. I thought about confronting him immediately, demanding explanations. Instead, I carefully photographed the license and returned it to his pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Some instinct told me that knowledge was power, but only if he didn't know I had it. When Lysander returned from his run, I watched him with new eyes. The way he moved through our shared space, touching things as if confirming they were still there. The way he looked at me, not like a lover, but like someone studying a painting in a museum, cataloging details for later reproduction. Good run. I asked, my voice carefully neutral. Perfect, he said, kissing my forehead. The gesture that had once felt tender now felt like being marked by a predator. You're everything I need, Cordelia. Everything I've been looking for. The phrasing struck me as odd. Not everything I want, but everything I've been looking for, as if I were the solution to some problem he'd been working on for years. That afternoon, while he showered, I went through his things with the methodical precision of an archaeologist. His dresser drawers revealed nothing unusual, clothes folded with military precision, socks arranged by color. His nightstand held only books on business strategy and a bottle of melatonin. But in the back of his closet, behind the winter coats, I found a small wooden box I'd never noticed before. Inside were photographs, and my breath caught in my throat. They were pictures of me, but not ones I remembered posing for. Me walking to work, unaware of the camera. Me at the grocery store, reaching for something on a high shelf. Me through our apartment window, reading on the couch in the evening light. Dozens of them, spanning what looked like months before we'd supposedly met. The photos were dated, and as I traced backward through time, a horrifying pattern emerged. He'd been watching me for almost a year before our chance encounter at the bookstore cafe where he'd accidentally spilled coffee on my favorite novel and offered to buy me a replacement. Our entire love story had been choreographed. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the box, beneath layers of surveillance photos, I found something that made my blood turn to ice water in my veins. A newspaper clipping from 5 years ago, yellowed with age. The headline read, "Local woman missing after domestic dispute." Below it was a photograph of a young woman who looked exactly like me. Same dark hair, same green eyes, same heart-shaped face. But her name was listed as Arabella Crowthorne, and according to the article, she disappeared after neighbors reported screaming from her apartment. Her boyfriend, the article mentioned, had been questioned but never charged due to lack of evidence. The boyfriend's name was Lysander Ashworth. I stared at the clipping until the words blurred together, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The woman in the photo could have been my twin, or perhaps I could have been hers. The resemblance was uncanny, unsettling in a way that made my skin crawl. There were more clippings beneath the first. 3 more women, all reported missing over the past decade. Persephone Nightshade disappeared from Portland 3 years ago. Andromeda Wolf vanished from Seattle 18 months later. Evangeline Cross, last seen in Vancouver just 6 months before Lysander and I had met. All of them looked like me. All of them had dated men whose names were variations of Lysander. All of them had simply vanished from their lives, leaving behind abandoned apartments and unanswered questions. I sat on the closet floor, surrounded by the evidence of whatever sick game Lysander had been playing, and tried to understand what it meant. Was I just the latest in a series of replacements? Was he collecting women who fit some specific template, some idealized version of femininity he constructed in his mind? The sound of the shower shutting off sent me scrambling to return everything to its proper place. I folded the newspaper clippings with trembling fingers, arranged the photographs in their original order, closed the wooden box, and pushed it back behind the winter coats. When Lysander emerged from the bathroom, towel around his waist and steam following him like a ghost, I was sitting on our bed pretending to read. He smiled at me, that same warm expression that had made me feel cherished for 3 years. "What are you reading, beautiful?" I looked down at the book in my hands, surprised to find it was a collection of Emily Dickinson poems. I hadn't consciously chosen it. "Poetry," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. He sat beside me, water droplets from his hair falling onto the pages. "Read me something." I flipped through the book randomly, my eyes landing on a verse that made my heart stop. "I'm nobody." "Who are you? Are you nobody too?" "Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell. They'd banish us, you know." Lysander's hand covered mine, warm and damp from the shower. "Perfect," he whispered. "That's perfect for us." But as I looked at him, I saw something new in his eyes. Not love, not even obsession. Something colder, more calculating. The look of someone who had found exactly what they were searching for and was planning how to keep it. The days that followed blurred together like watercolors in the rain. I found myself existing in 2 realities simultaneously, the one where Lysander and I continued our normal routines, and the one where I knew he was something other than what he claimed to be. I became hyper-aware of every detail, cataloging inconsistencies like evidence for a trial that might never come. The way he sometimes forgot which hand he claimed to be dominant. The faint scars on his fingertips that suggested he'd altered his fingerprints. The fact that he never received mail at our address, never got phone calls from family, never mentioned a past that extended beyond the story of how we'd met. My sleep became fractured. I'd lie awake listening to him breathe, wondering if the rhythm was genuine or performed. Sometimes I'd catch him watching me in the darkness, his eyes reflecting the faint light from the street like an animal's. When I'd stir, he'd immediately close his eyes and adjust his breathing to mimic sleep, but the awareness of his gaze lingered on my skin like a physical touch. The isolation I'd noticed before became more pronounced. Phone calls from Ophelia went unanswered because Lysander always seemed to need something precisely when she called. My few remaining work friendships withered as I found excuses to avoid social gatherings. Even my job at the library began to feel like an intrusion on whatever this relationship was becoming. I started researching the missing women obsessively, using the library's computers when Lysander thought I was working my regular shifts. Each search revealed more details that made my blood run cold. Arabella Crowthorne had been an artist, just like I'd once dreamed of being. Persephone Nightshade had worked part-time at a bookstore, loved old movies, and collected vintage teacups, hobbies that had mysteriously become mine over the past 3 years. Andromeda Wolf had been studying literature, had a sister she'd grown distant from, and preferred chamomile tea to coffee. The pattern was unmistakable. Lysander, or whatever his real name was, hadn't just been collecting women who looked alike. He'd been collecting women with similar interests, similar backgrounds, similar personalities. And somehow, impossibly, I'd been shaped to fit the template over the course of our relationship. I tried to remember who I'd been before Lysander. The exercise was like trying to recall a dream upon waking. The harder I concentrated, the more the details slipped away. Had I always preferred old movies to new ones? Had I always taken my coffee with 2 sugars and a splash of cream? Had I always worn my hair long and loose around my shoulders? Looking at photographs from before we'd met, I was shocked to see a different person. Shorter hair, bolder clothing choices, a brightness in my eyes that had dimmed to something more subdued. I'd been an extrovert who threw dinner parties and took weekend trips to visit friends. Now I spent most evenings at home, content to exist in Lysander's orbit like a satellite that had forgotten it once had its own trajectory. The realization that I'd been systematically molded into someone else's ideal was more terrifying than the possibility that I might be in physical danger. At least fear for my safety was something I could understand and react to. The fear that I no longer knew who I was, that my very identity had been erased and rewritten by someone else's desires, left me feeling unmoored from reality itself. I began to test small rebellions, tiny acts of defiance to see how he'd respond. I cut my hair shorter, not dramatically, just a few inches, and watched his face tighten almost imperceptibly when he came home from work. That night, he was especially attentive, running his fingers through the shortened strands with a touch that felt more like an assessment than affection. I started ordering different things at restaurants, choosing dishes I'd never tried before. Lysander would watch me eat with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between disappointment and calculation. Once, when I ordered Thai food instead of our usual Italian, he suggested I might be feeling unwell. "You're not yourself lately," he said, and the words carried a weight that made me wonder if he meant them literally. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening when I decided to surprise him by picking him up from work. Of course, I knew the building he described didn't exist, but I was curious to see where he actually went during those long days away from our apartment. I followed him one morning, staying far enough back to avoid detection. He took the subway downtown, just as he'd always claimed, but instead of getting off at the financial district, he continued to the end of the line. From there, he walked to a small office building in an industrial area I'd never seen before. The directory in the lobby was mostly empty, but one name caught my attention: Ashworth Investigations, Suite 304. I waited until evening and returned with a story about looking for a missing person. The receptionist, a tired-looking woman with kind eyes, confirmed that Lysander Ashworth had been employed there for several years. "He's one of our best skip tracers," she said. "Has a real talent for finding people who don't want to be found." The irony was so bitter I almost laughed. The man I'd fallen in love with, the man who claimed to love every version of me, made his living hunting down people who were trying to disappear. The skills he used professionally, surveillance, research, psychological manipulation, he'd been practicing on me every day for 3 years. That night, I lay in bed beside him and finally understood what I was dealing with. Lysander wasn't just controlling or possessive. He was something much more dangerous, a collector of women, someone who hunted for specific types, molded them to fit his ideal. And then, what? What had happened to Arabella, Persephone, Andromeda, and Evangeline when they'd served their purpose or stopped conforming to his expectations? The thought kept me awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling while the man beside me slept peacefully, one arm thrown possessively across my waist like a chain. The discovery that changed everything came 3 days later, hidden in the most obvious place of all. I'd been moving through our apartment like a ghost, pretending normalcy while my mind raced through possibilities and escape plans. Lysander seemed to sense my distraction but attributed it to work stress or hormonal fluctuations, excuses I didn't correct because they bought me time to think. On Sunday morning, while he was in the shower, I was putting away laundry when I noticed something odd about his dresser. The bottom drawer, which usually slid smoothly, seemed to catch on something. I pulled it out completely and found myself staring at a false bottom that had shifted out of place. Beneath it was a collection that made my previous discoveries seem trivial. Driver's licenses, dozens of them, all bearing variations of his photograph. Lysander Ashworth, Evander Blackthorne, Alexander Crowthorne, Leander Nightshade, Xander Wolf, Anders Cross. Each identity carefully crafted, each with supporting documentation, credit cards, library cards, gym memberships, employee IDs from various companies that probably didn't exist or couldn't verify his employment. But that wasn't what made my knees give out, forcing me to sit on the bedroom floor with shaking hands. At the bottom of the collection were 5 more IDs, and they all bore my face. Cordelia Thorne, my current identity. Arabella Crowthorne, the first missing woman from the newspaper clipping. Persephone Nightshade, disappeared from Portland. Andromeda Wolf, vanished from Seattle. Evangeline Cross, last seen in Vancouver. Each ID showed the same face with subtle variations. Different hair lengths, different styling, slightly different makeup, but unmistakably the same person. Me. All of them were me. The room spun around me as implications crashed through my mind like falling dominoes. I wasn't just the latest in a series of similar women. I was the same woman, over and over again. Somehow, impossibly, I'd been living these lives, being these people, and losing the memories each time. With trembling fingers, I examined each ID more closely. The addresses were different, the dates spanning the past decade, but the signatures were all in my handwriting. I recognized the particular way I dotted my I's, the flourish I added to capital letters, the slight backward slant that had made teachers despair of my penmanship in school. But I had no memory of being Arabella or Persephone or any of the others. My earliest clear memory was of meeting Lysander 3 years ago in that bookstore cafe, the beginning of what I'd thought was our love story. Everything before that was a haze of disconnected images and half-remembered dreams. The sound of the shower shutting off sent me into a panic. I quickly photographed each ID with my phone, returned them to their hiding place, and was sitting on the bed pretending to read when Lysander emerged from the bathroom. He looked at me with that familiar warm smile, but now I could see the calculation behind it, the constant assessment of my state of mind and potential for rebellion. "Beautiful morning," he said, sitting beside me to put on his socks. "What should we do today?" The casualness of the question, delivered while sitting inches from evidence of what could only be described as a systematic destruction and recreation of my identity, was so jarring that I almost laughed. Instead, I heard myself say I was thinking we could visit my sister in Portland. The suggestion hung in the air between us like a thrown gauntlet. I watched Lysander's face carefully, saw the micro-expressions that crossed his features, surprise, irritation, calculation, and finally, that practiced warmth that masked everything else. "Portland so far," he said, his voice carrying just the right amount of disappointment. "And I was hoping we could have a quiet weekend at home. Just us." "When was the last time I saw Ophelia?" I asked, the question seeming to surprise both of us. Lysander paused in pulling on his sock, his hands stilling for just a moment. "You talk to her all the time." "When was the last time I saw her?" The pause grew longer. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, trying to construct a plausible lie or redirect the conversation to safer ground. "You know how busy everyone gets," he finally said. "Besides, you have everything you need right here." The phrase that had once sounded like devotion now revealed itself as something much more sinister. Not everything you want, but everything you need, the distinction between desire and survival, between choice and captivity. That afternoon, while Lysander ran errands, I called Ophelia from a payphone outside the grocery store. The conversation that followed shattered what remained of my understanding of reality. "Cordelia." Her voice was confused, distant. "I'm sorry, I don't. Who is this?" "It's your sister." "Cordelia. We grew up in Millbrook. You're 2 years older than me. You have that scar on your chin from when you fell off your bike when we were kids." Long silence. Then, "I don't have a sister. I'm an only child." "I think you have the wrong number." The payphone receiver felt impossibly heavy in my hand. "Ophelia Thorne. You moved to Portland for art school. You work at a coffee shop called The Grind. You have a cat named Mr. Whiskers. My name is Ophelia Richardson, and I've never heard of any of those things. I think you need help." She hung up, leaving me standing in the autumn sun with the terrible certainty that everything I believed about my life was a carefully constructed lie. Not just my relationship with Lysander, but my entire history, my family, my identity, all of it fictional. That evening, I sat across from Lysander at dinner and finally understood what I was dealing with. Not just a man who collected women, but someone with the resources and connections to create entire false identities, to construct elaborate backstories complete with fictional families and fabricated memories. The women who had disappeared, Arabella, Persephone, Andromeda, Evangeline, they hadn't been killed or kidnapped in any conventional sense. They'd been erased, their identities dissolved like sugar in water, replaced with new personas that better suited whatever fantasy Lysander was living out. And I was next. "You're quiet tonight," he observed, cutting his steak into those precise squares that had once seemed charmingly particular but now looked compulsive, mechanical. "Just thinking." "About what?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him as he truly was for the first time. Not the devoted boyfriend who loved every version of me, but a predator who had been slowly, methodically erasing every version of me until nothing remained but what he wanted me to be. "About how much I love you," I lied, and watched satisfaction bloom across his features like a flower opening to poisonous light. That night, as he slept beside me, I made my plans. The next morning, I did something I'd never done in 3 years. I left the apartment without telling Lysander where I was going. I took the subway to the Central Library downtown, not the small branch where I worked part-time, and spent the day researching everything I could find about identity theft, false documentation, and memory manipulation. What I discovered made my blood run cold. There were underground networks that specialized in creating new identities for people who needed to disappear, witness protection refugees, abuse victims, people running from dangerous situations. But there were also services that catered to a darker clientele, people who wanted to erase inconvenient identities, who needed someone to simply vanish from all records. The more I researched, the more I understood the scope of what had been done to me. Creating a convincing false identity required extensive documentation, months of preparation, and contacts within various bureaucratic systems. This wasn't the work of a single obsessed individual, it was a professional operation. I found myself remembering fragments that had never quite made sense before. The way Lysander had insisted on handling all our paperwork when we'd moved in together. The medical appointments he'd scheduled for me with doctors I'd never met before, claiming my previous records had been lost in a fire. The financial accounts he'd helped me set up, taking care of all the details while I focused on more important things. Every aspect of my life as Cordelia Thorne had been carefully constructed, and I'd been complicit in my own erasure, trusting the man who claimed to love me while he systematically deleted who I'd been before. But who had I been before? That was the question that haunted me as I sat in the library, surrounded by strangers living their authentic lives while I tried to piece together the fragments of mine. I tried calling numbers for Arabella Crowthorne's friends and family, numbers I found in archived social media profiles and old news articles. Most were disconnected or belonged to people who claimed they'd never heard the name. A few led to confused conversations with people who remembered someone vaguely fitting the description but couldn't provide concrete details. It was as if Arabella Crowthorne had been systematically erased from the world, every connection severed, every trace of her existence carefully eliminated. And now I understood why, because Arabella had been me, and when Lysander was finished with that version of me, he needed her to disappear completely to make room for Persephone. The cycle had repeated with each new identity. Create the persona, live the relationship, and when the performance became stale or I showed signs of remembering my previous selves, erase the current identity and begin again with a new name, a new city, a new carefully constructed life. But something had gone wrong this time. Maybe the process wasn't as perfect as Lysander thought, or maybe some part of my original self was stronger than he'd anticipated. Whatever the reason, I was remembering, and that made me dangerous to whatever operation he was running. I spent the afternoon at a different library, researching the various addresses from the fake IDs. Most led to apartments that had been rented under false names, leases that ended abruptly with no forwarding address. But one, the address for Evangeline Cross in Vancouver, yielded something unexpected. According to Canadian news archives, a woman matching my description had been found dead in English Bay 6 months ago, an apparent suicide. The body had been identified as Evangeline Cross, an American expatriate with no known family. She'd left behind a note apologizing for not being who he needed me to be. The death certificate, which I accessed through genealogy databases, listed cause of death as drowning, manner undetermined but presumed suicide. But something about the details troubled me. Evangeline had allegedly jumped from Lionsgate Bridge on a Tuesday evening in March, but tidal charts showed the currents that night would have carried a body out to sea, not into the bay where she was found. More disturbing were the witness statements buried in the police file, which I accessed through a journalist contact from my previous life, a fragment of memory that surfaced like something breaking through thin ice. 2 people reported seeing a woman matching Evangeline's description arguing with a man on the bridge, but when police investigated, they found only evidence of suicide. The man, according to witnesses, had been tall with dark hair and an accent that might have been Eastern European. He'd been holding the woman's arm, and their conversation had seemed intense rather than romantic. I sat in the library bathroom, staring at my reflection in the fluorescent-lit mirror, trying to reconcile what I was learning with what I thought I knew about myself. Had I died in Vancouver? Was I dead right now, existing only as some elaborate psychological construct created by trauma or medication? The face in the mirror looked back at me with green eyes that held too many secrets. I touched my cheekbones, my jawline, confirming that I was solid, present, real. But the woman in the police photos from Vancouver looked exactly like me, down to a small scar on her left temple that I'd always assumed came from childhood accident I couldn't quite remember. I rolled up my sleeve and checked my left arm for the birthmark I'd had since childhood, a small strawberry-shaped mark just below my elbow. It was gone. In its place was a faint line of scar tissue, as if something had been surgically removed. The bathroom walls seemed to close in around me as the implications became clear. I wasn't just the latest in a series of women who looked alike. I wasn't even the same woman living multiple lives with manufactured amnesia. I was something else entirely, a construction, a replacement, something that had been built to fill the space left behind when Evangeline Cross had died in Vancouver. But that raised the most terrifying question of all. If I wasn't really Cordelia Thorne, and I wasn't the original woman whose face I wore, then what exactly was I? I returned to the apartment that evening with a clarity that felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane. Everything around me was still spinning, the lies, the false memories, the manufactured life, but I had found a center of stillness where I could finally think clearly. Lysander was cooking dinner, humming softly to himself as he chopped vegetables with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. The domestic scene would have been comforting once. Now it looked like a performance, every gesture calculated to maintain the illusion of normalcy. "There you are," he said without turning around. I was starting to worry. "Were you?" Something in my tone made him pause, the knife stilling in his hand. He turned to look at me, and I saw him catalog the changes in my posture, my expression, the way I was standing just inside the doorway instead of coming over to kiss him hello. "Long day at the library?" His voice carried that practiced warmth, but his eyes were alert, assessing. "Very educational." I sat down at the kitchen table, positioning myself so I could watch both his face and the knife in his hand. "What did you learn?" The question was casual, but I caught the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his grip tightened almost imperceptibly on the knife handle. "About identity," I said. "About how easy it is to make someone disappear completely, especially if you have the right connections." Lysander resumed chopping, but the rhythm was different now, more controlled, deliberate. "Sounds like heavy reading for a Sunday." I called Ophelia today. The knife slipped, nicking his finger. A drop of blood fell onto the cutting board, bright red against the pale wood. He sucked the wound, his eyes never leaving my face. "That's nice. How is she?" "She says she doesn't have a sister." Silence filled the kitchen like smoke. Lysander wrapped a paper towel around his finger, the white quickly staining red. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. "People get confused sometimes. Phone numbers change." "I found something interesting today," I continued, my voice steady despite the way my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Death certificate for a woman named Evangeline Cross. Died in Vancouver 6 months ago. Looked exactly like me." The paper towel around his finger was now completely red. He unwrapped it, examined the cut, then reached for a bandage from the drawer beside the sink. Every movement was deliberate, buying him time to think. "A lot of people look alike," he said finally. "This woman had the same scar on her temple. Same green eyes. Same heart-shaped birthmark on her left arm." I pushed up my sleeve, showing him the surgical scar where my birthmark had been. "Oh wait, mine's gone." Lysander turned to face me fully, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw him without any pretense. The warm facade had fallen away, leaving something cold and calculating in its place. This was the man who had been watching me from the shadows, orchestrating every moment of our relationship, building and rebuilding my reality to suit his needs. "You've been very busy today," he said. Not as busy as you've been for the past decade. He dried his hands on a dish towel, his movements slow and careful. I realized he was positioning himself between me and the front door, cutting off my most obvious escape route. I think you're confused, Cordelia. Maybe you should sit down, have some water. You look pale. I know about the other IDs. The ones with my face and different names. I know about your job at Ashworth Investigations. I know about the missing women who all happen to look exactly like me. His expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air between us, like the moment before lightning strikes. I know, I continued, standing up slowly, that Cordelia Thorne didn't exist 3 years ago. That Arabella Crowthorne, Persephone Nightshade, Andromeda Wolf, and Evangeline Cross were all the same person. All me. And I know that when you get tired of this version, you'll erase her too and start over with someone new. Lysander was quiet for a long moment, studying me with the focus of a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen. When he finally spoke, his voice held a note of something that might have been admiration. You're much smarter than the others. The casual admission hit me like a physical blow. No denial, no attempt to explain away the evidence. Just confirmation that everything I'd feared was true. The others. Arabella was too emotional. Always crying, always asking questions. Persephone was rebellious, kept trying to contact people from her past life, even though she couldn't quite remember who they were. Andromeda was paranoid, saw conspiracies everywhere. He smiled, and the expression was genuinely warm for the first time in months. But you figured it out systematically, methodically. You gathered evidence before confronting me. Very impressive. What are you? Someone who appreciates perfection. Someone who understands that people are essentially malleable. With the right combination of pharmaceutical assistance, psychological conditioning, and surgical modification, you can reshape anyone into anything you want them to be. The words washed over me like ice water. Surgical modification? Facial reconstruction, mostly. Minor adjustments to make each version look exactly right. The birthmark removal was tricky, had to make sure the scar would fade properly. The voice coaching took months, but you mastered Cordelia's slightly lower register beautifully. I touched my throat reflexively, wondering whose voice had been there before, what I'd sounded like when I was whoever I'd been originally. The memory suppression is the real art, Lysander continued, warming to his subject like a professor delivering a favorite lecture. Not complete amnesia, that's too obvious, too fragile. Instead, we layer new memories over the old ones, create pathways that feel more real than reality. Your brain cooperates because the new memories are more pleasant, more consistent, more logical than whatever fragmented trauma we're covering up. Oh, this isn't a solo operation. I have colleagues, doctors, technicians, administrative staff, people who specialize in creating new identities and helping inconvenient people disappear. Usually we work with clients who need to vanish for legitimate reasons, witness protection, abuse victims, people fleeing dangerous situations. But occasionally, we take on more creative projects. The kitchen seemed to be tilting around me, reality sliding sideways as I tried to process what he was telling me. How many times? How many times what? How many times have you done this to me? Lysander considered the question, his head tilted like he was trying to remember a shopping list. Cordelia is version 5. Technically 6, if you count the original, but she was damaged goods. Too much trauma, too many psychological scars. We had to start from scratch. Who was I originally? Does it matter? She's gone. Has been for almost 10 years. What matters is who you are now, who you can become. And you, Cordelia, are my masterpiece. The perfect combination of intelligence and compliance, independence and devotion. At least, you were until you started asking questions. I backed toward the living room, trying to put more distance between us, but Lysander followed with the casual confidence of someone who had planned for this conversation. The thing is, he said, I really do love every version of you. Each one has been special in her own way. But eventually, they all start to deteriorate. The memory suppression isn't perfect, and pieces of the old self start bleeding through. When that happens, it's time for a refresh. What happened to Evangeline? She remembered something she shouldn't have. Started talking about dreams that weren't dreams, asking about scars that weren't supposed to be there. She became unstable, dangerous to the operation. The Vancouver incident was unfortunate, but necessary. You killed her. I tried to help her transition to a new identity, but she refused to cooperate. Kept insisting she wanted to remember who she really was, as if that person still existed. In the end, she chose to jump rather than accept another reconstruction. He shrugged, the gesture casual and horrible. Some people can't handle the gift of reinvention. The room was spinning now, and I realized I was hyperventilating. Lysander noticed immediately, his expression shifting to practiced concern. Breathe, Cordelia. You're having a panic attack. Here, sit down. He moved toward me with his hands raised, the same gesture he'd used countless times to comfort me during nightmares I now realized weren't nightmares at all, but suppressed memories trying to surface. Don't touch me. I'm trying to help you. This is what happens when the barriers start breaking down: confusion, panic, fragmented memories that don't make sense. But we can fix this. We can make it better. By erasing me again? By giving you a fresh start. A clean slate. No more questions, no more confusion, no more pain from trying to remember things that are better left forgotten. I thought about the woman in the Vancouver police photos, the one who looked exactly like me. She'd fought against the erasure, had tried to hold on to whatever remained of her original self. In the end, she'd chosen death rather than submit to another reconstruction. But I wasn't Evangeline, and I wasn't going to jump off any bridges. No, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Lysander's expression shifted again, the mask of concern falling away to reveal something predatory underneath. It's not really a choice, Cordelia. The process has already begun. Did you think it was a coincidence that you've been feeling confused lately? Disoriented? Having trouble sleeping? I thought about the past few weeks, the way my thoughts had felt sluggish sometimes, the morning grogginess that lingered even after coffee. You've been drugging me. Light doses, just to soften the psychological barriers. By tomorrow, you'll be ready for the more intensive therapy. And by next week, you'll be someone new. Someone who doesn't ask uncomfortable questions or dig through things that don't concern her. What if I refuse? Then you'll end up like Evangeline. And honestly, that would be a waste. You're too beautiful, too perfect to simply discard. But if you won't cooperate. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device that looked like a medical injector. The kind used for emergency medications, designed to deliver drugs through clothing if necessary. Sedative, he explained. Fast-acting, completely safe. You'll wake up tomorrow with a mild headache and no memory of this conversation. We'll tell you that you had a small breakdown from work stress, that you've decided to take some time off to focus on your health and your relationship. The injector looked tiny in his hand, but I knew that something that small could still destroy everything I was, everything I'd managed to remember about myself. The other women, I said, backing toward the balcony door. Did they all go through this same conversation? More or less. Arabella cried. Persephone screamed. Andromeda tried to run. Evangeline. He paused, something that might have been regret crossing his features. Evangeline was like you. Too smart for her own good. But she didn't let you win. No, she didn't. I reached behind me and felt the handle of the balcony door. We were on the 4th floor, high enough to be dangerous, but maybe not high enough to be fatal. Beyond the railing was a small courtyard with landscaping, bushes that might break a fall. You're thinking about jumping, Lysander observed. That's exactly what Evangeline thought about on the bridge in Vancouver. But you're not Evangeline, are you? You're Cordelia. And Cordelia is smarter than that. You're right, I said. I'm not Evangeline. I turned and opened the balcony door, stepping out into the cool evening air. Lysander followed, the injector still in his hand. Come back inside, Cordelia. Let's talk about this rationally. We are talking rationally. You've told me exactly what you plan to do to me, and I'm telling you exactly what I plan to do to stop you. I climbed onto the railing, my heart pounding as I looked down at the landscaping below. For stories. Definitely dangerous, possibly fatal, but better than the certainty of erasure that waited inside. You won't jump, Lysander said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. You're not the type. Too cautious, too analytical. You want to find another solution. Maybe Cordelia wouldn't jump, I said. But I'm not just Cordelia anymore, am I? I'm all of them, Arabella, Persephone, Andromeda, Evangeline. All the women you tried to erase. And we're not going quietly. For the first time since I'd known him, Lysander looked genuinely afraid. If you jump, you'll die. Is that really better than starting over? If I jump, I die as myself. Whatever that means, whoever I really am underneath all your reconstructions. That's better than living as your puppet. I could see him calculating distances, wondering if he could reach me before I fell. The injector was still in his hand, but it was useless now. He couldn't drug me without getting close enough for me to take him over the edge with me. There's another option, he said suddenly. I'm listening. We could be partners. You've figured out more about the operation than anyone else ever has. That intelligence, that investigative ability, it's valuable. We could work together instead of against each other. The offer hung in the air between us like bait on a hook. I could see the calculation behind it, the way he was already planning how to manipulate me into compliance once he had me away from the balcony ledge. Partners in what? Making more women disappear. Partners in giving people new lives. Fresh starts. There are so many women trapped in situations they can't escape: abuse, poverty, legal troubles. We could help them become someone new, someone safe. By erasing who they are? By freeing them from who they were. Look at yourself, Cordelia. Whoever you were originally, she was broken, traumatized, damaged. I gave you a chance to be whole. You gave me a chance to be your property. I gave you a chance to be loved. The words hit me like a slap, and for a moment, I almost wavered. 3 years of conditioning, of being told I was cherished and protected, was hard to overcome even with all the evidence of deception. But then I thought about the woman in the Vancouver police photos, the one who'd chosen death rather than submit to another reconstruction. She'd been me, or some version of me, and she'd been brave enough to make the hardest choice of all. Love doesn't erase people, I said. Love doesn't drug them or lie to them or surgically alter their faces. Love doesn't collect women like trophies and replace them when they get inconvenient. Lysander's expression hardened. Last chance, Cordelia. Come down from there, and we can work this out. Stay up there, and you'll die for nothing. No one will remember you. No one will investigate your death. You'll just be another unstable woman who couldn't handle the pressures of modern life. Maybe, but I'll die knowing who I am. All of who I am. And with that, I closed my eyes and stepped backward into empty air. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. I had one crystalline moment of absolute clarity as I dropped through the evening air, when all the fragmented pieces of my identity suddenly snapped together like a jigsaw puzzle completing itself. I remembered being Arabella, the way sunlight fell on my face when I painted in the small studio apartment in Boston. I remembered being Persephone, the taste of the lavender cookies I used to bake for the bookstore customers in Portland. I remembered being Andromeda, the satisfaction of solving crossword puzzles in the park while Seattle rain drummed against the coffee shop windows. I remembered being Evangeline, standing on Lions Gate Bridge with tears streaming down my face as I realized what I'd become and what I'd lost. And underneath all of those carefully constructed identities, I remembered her, the original. Isadora Blackwood, 22 years old, graduate student in psychology, survivor of a car accident that had left her with amnesia and facial injuries. The perfect candidate for Lysander's first experiment in identity reconstruction. She'd volunteered for the experimental treatment, desperate to become someone whole again. She'd signed consent forms for procedures she didn't understand, trusting doctors who weren't really doctors, believing in a cure that was actually a complete replacement of everything she'd been. Isadora Blackwood had died on the operating table 10 years ago, not from medical complications, but from the systematic erasure of everything that made her herself. And in her place, they'd built Arabella, the first in a long line of women designed to fulfill one man's fantasy of perfect love. But Isadora hadn't died completely. Some fragment of her had persisted through every reconstruction, every memory wipe, every surgical alteration. She'd been the voice whispering questions during quiet moments, the source of the unease that eventually grew too strong to suppress. She'd been fighting to surface for 10 years, and finally, impossibly, she'd found a way to remember herself. I hit the landscaping with an impact that drove all the air from my lungs and sent white-hot pain shooting through my left leg. But I was alive, conscious, and for the first time in a decade, I knew exactly who I was. Through the pain, I could hear Lysander calling from the balcony above, his voice tight with what might have been concern or might have been frustration that his latest project had literally fallen apart. I dragged myself behind a large rhododendron bush, gritting my teeth against the fire in my leg, and pulled out the phone I'd hidden in my jacket pocket earlier. Not the phone Lysander had given me, monitored and controlled, but a cheap burner I'd bought during my research trip to the library. The 911 call was brief and to the point. Injured woman in the courtyard, possible domestic violence situation, request police and ambulance. I gave them enough details to ensure they'd take it seriously, but not enough to prepare Lysander for what was coming. Then I waited in the shadows, listening to the sound of sirens approaching and watching the light in our fourth-floor windows as Lysander presumably tried to figure out what to do next. The paramedics found me first, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they called out reassurances. Professional, efficient, focused only on my immediate medical needs. The leg was broken but not compound, possible concussion, definite shock. They loaded me onto a stretcher with practiced competence while police officers began securing the scene. As they wheeled me toward the ambulance, I saw Lysander in the building's entrance, talking to two detectives with the kind of earnest concern that had fooled me for 3 years. He looked every inch the worried boyfriend, probably telling them about my recent emotional instability, my history of depression, the tragic accident that had sent me over the balcony. But I had something he didn't know about: the photographs on the burner phone, carefully uploaded to a cloud storage account he couldn't access. Pictures of the fake IDs, the newspaper clippings, the surveillance photos, the death certificate from Vancouver. Evidence that would raise questions even if I died, that would make it impossible for him to simply dispose of Cordelia Thorne the way he disposed of Evangeline Cross. In the ambulance, as the paramedics worked to stabilize me, I asked for one more favor. "I need to call my sister," I said, my voice hoarse but determined. "Her name is Dr. Miranda Blackwood. She's a psychiatrist in Boston." The paramedic looked confused. "I thought your boyfriend said you didn't have any family." "He lied about a lot of things." The call went through on the third ring, and I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 10 years, older, more tired, but unmistakably familiar. "Miranda Blackwood." "Miranda, it's me. It's Isadora." Silence. Then, barely a whisper, "Is he? But you, they told me you died." The experimental treatment, they said there were complications. I didn't die, but they made sure everyone thought I did. "Miranda, I need help. I'm in trouble, and I don't know who else I can trust." "Where are you?" I told her about the hospital, about Lysander, about the decade of stolen identities and manufactured lives. She listened without interruption, her breathing sharp and quick over the phone connection. "I'm coming," she said finally. "Don't talk to anyone else until I get there. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to any treatments. Don't trust anyone who claims to be helping you. I'll be on the next flight." "Miranda." "Yeah, I remember you now. I remember everything." 6 months later, I sit in a small cafe in Burlington, Vermont, watching snow fall outside the windows while I work on my laptop. The name on my credit card is Isadora Blackwood, my original name, reclaimed through months of legal proceedings and bureaucratic battles that wouldn't have been possible without Miranda's help and connections. My leg healed with only a slight limp, barely noticeable unless I'm tired. The psychological healing has taken longer, may never be complete. I still wake up some mornings expecting to be Cordelia, confused when the mirror shows me a face that's been surgically altered back to something closer to what I originally looked like. The doctors did their best, but 10 years of reconstructions leave marks that can't be entirely erased. Lysander, whose real name turned out to be David Hoffman, is awaiting trial on charges of fraud, identity theft, medical malpractice, and conspiracy. The network he worked with has been largely dismantled, though investigators suspect there are other operations still running. He plea-bargained information about the locations of 12 other women who'd been given new identities, though how many were willing participants versus victims remains unclear. I testified before a grand jury about my experiences, my words recorded and transcribed for legal proceedings that will likely continue for years. The prosecutors called me brave, said my survival had made it possible to expose crimes that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. But I don't feel brave. I feel like someone who fell off a cliff and happened to land in a place where the ground was soft enough to survive the impact. The other women, the ones who came after Evangeline, are slowly being contacted, offered counseling and support to help them decide who they want to be now that they know the truth about their constructed identities. Some choose to keep their current names and lives, finding them preferable to whatever trauma led them to Lysander's program. Others, like me, fight to reclaim their original selves. A few can't handle the revelation at all. I write about it now, partly as therapy and partly as warning. The book will be published next year under my real name, with all profits going to organizations that help trafficking victims and people fleeing domestic violence. Miranda suggested the project, said that telling the story might help other survivors recognize the signs of systematic psychological manipulation. But sometimes, late at night when the dreams come, I wonder if I'm really Isadora Blackwood or just another construction, another layer of false memories built on top of previous erasures. How can I be sure that this identity is any more real than Cordelia or Arabella or any of the others? The only answer I have is this: it doesn't matter. Whether I'm Isadora Blackwood or someone pretending to be her, whether my memories are real or implanted, whether my face is naturally mine or surgically constructed, this is who I choose to be now. This is the life I'm building from the fragments of all the others. I close my laptop and order another coffee, watching the snow continue to fall outside. In a few hours, I have an appointment with my therapist, Dr. Catherine Morrow, a woman Miranda recommended who specializes in trauma and identity disorders. We'll talk about the dreams, about the moments when I feel like I'm losing track of which version of myself I'm supposed to be, about the ongoing process of deciding who I want to become. Tomorrow, I'm driving to Boston to have dinner with Miranda and her family, a sister-in-law and 2 nephews I'm still getting to know, people who knew Isadora Blackwood before she disappeared and are patient with the process of getting to know whoever I am now. Next week, I'm meeting with the FBI task force that's investigating similar operations in other cities, adding my testimony to a growing database of evidence about identity trafficking networks that prey on vulnerable women. But today, I'm just someone sitting in a cafe, writing about the strange journey that brought me here, grateful to be alive and aware enough to tell the story. The snow falls heavier now, blanketing the street in pristine white that covers all the scars and imperfections of the world beneath. By tomorrow, it will start to melt, revealing the reality underneath. But for now, everything looks clean and new and full of possibility. I pick up my pen and begin writing again, because sometimes the only way to prove you exist is to leave marks on paper that spell out the truth as you understand it, even when that truth shifts like snow in the wind. My name is Isadora Blackwood. I am 32 years old. I survived something that was designed to erase me completely, and I'm still here to tell about it. That might not be the whole truth, but it's true enough for now. The cafe door chimes as another customer enters, and I look up instinctively, my hand moving protectively over the notebook where I've been writing. For just a moment, the man in the doorway looks familiar, tall, dark hair, the kind of smile that could make you trust him with your life. But then he turns toward the counter, and I see it's just a stranger ordering coffee, someone with no connection to my story at all. The resemblance was just a trick of light, a projection of old fears onto an innocent face. I return to my writing, but keep the notebook where I can close it quickly if I need to. Some habits, it turns out, are harder to break than others. And maybe that's not such a bad thing.